Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. Company on Power Talk, thank you so much for making us part of your day today, wherever you are in the galaxy. And really, after 10 years, cutting my way out of the woods with a machete and seeking truth and recognizing that the only people that are actually going to tell me the truth are the cats. And when I mean by the cats, I mean guys that are ultimately people that play music for a living as a profession and provide healing and soulfulness for patrons of the arts or journalists like myself or both. And I got a chance today to talk to a decorated studio cat it's been a long time coming, a guy who has been on a lot of seminal albums, but also random albums that have given me and my kids a huge amount of enjoyment over dinner, putting it on the record player, dancing to it, and just ultimately feeling better, whatever dis-ease you might have. When you put on a record or you walk into a club and you get to see people like David Kemper and Michael O'Marty and Jim Keltner and Jerry Jamot and Chuck Rainey and my guest, there's just no way that you wouldn't walk out of there completely healed for days. Dean Parks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. Nice intro.
Did you catch that tune?
Yeah, I don't recognize it, but I heard it.
Yeah, that is one of the most insane. I mean, just to tell you how long I've been looking for you. I mean, that was Evie Sands, a state of mind, and the group on it. It's O'Mardian, Hungate, Ed Green, and it is. I never even got to side B, Dean, because side A is so pulsating. And here's what I wanted to start with you with. All those cats. Well, let's just take Ed Green. The dude was channeling Elvin Jones in the late 60s before he went off into the studios. Ernie Watts was with Cannonball, and it was listening to Coltrane on his Stacker record player in Delaware growing up. All you guys had the foundations of melodic improvisation or jazz. And I kind of wanted you to talk. That's what made all these pop rock albums swing so hard. There was no mechanized machinery. There was no quantized rhythm. You guys were playing, you were jamming up the tunes, but you had the vocabulary. And I wanted you to talk about your jazz roots prior to entering the studio scene.
Well, okay, that sounds pretty interesting. Well, that is true. Most of when we came into studios, and I arrived in LA on January 1st, 1970, and there was both kinds of things happening in the studios, meaning kind of more traditional, literate, sheet and come up with a part kind of sessions. So it's interesting that the studio players that seemed to be successful at the gig did have to have the other vocabulary. The way it happened for me, I came up in Fort Worth, Texas, and it was kind of country music and rockabilly and all those instrumentals in the 50s and 60s. I guess I started with a little bit of minimal reading and guitar lessons. I had about a year and a half of guitar lessons, but I never got into jazz or even complex chords. It was major chords or minor chords. And I played in a little group that played all the instrumentals when I was a kid, 14 years old or something like that. The drummer was an older guy, and he'd just gone to college. And he was liking jazz, and he was a good swinging drummer. He could cut it, and he started sort of bad rapping our group and eventually dropped out of the group because we were not quite hip enough. But he did, a friend of his turned me on to 2 songs.
Oh, wow.
And here's the level of sophistication. How Are Things in Guacamora was one song.
Wow.
I can't remember the other song. But it got me digging into a little bit, and and his friend had written out the chord changes for me, and I went out and got a Mickey Baker jazz guitar book, and it had all the shapes. It was interesting. I didn't really pull the chords apart to know what they meant exactly, but I kind of worked. At least that was part of my vocabulary. But meanwhile, I could already play what I hear on the guitar.
Well, that's what is striking about, even the earlier cats from you, but you guys were all, for the most part, ear trained. And it's striking today how many cats, I'm 42, so I mean, my generation and younger, how many of them, we caught a little bit of the soul. I mean, I was born in 78, and my peers, some of them are street scholars, but most cats today are learning music by reading it before they can hear it. And their ears are locked. And that's one reason why there's a homogenization of sound, setting aside all the business stuff. It's hard to tell who people are. You could tell Ben Benet from Larry Carlton from Dean Parks. You could tell David Kemper from Jim Keltner to Ed Green. It's because you guys learned by ear first before you learned to read.
And there wasn't exactly schooling for what
there was no school. Exactly. It was you were making up the rules. I think it was the most intoxicating time. Were you hip at all, or have you gone back and taught and really vetted the, because you weren't ensconced in bebop or anything like that. The payola scandal, are you hip to that at all? When they had essentially Hank Ballard and the R&B cats, that was pretty raunchy stuff, similar to rap.
Was that the Alan Freed thing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They whitewashed it all. And I'm wondering, because a lot of that R&B stuff is what rap lyrics are like today. And then all of a sudden, you had this crackdown where all of a sudden you had Pat Boone playing these R&B tunes, and it was all cleaned up, nice Euro, Anglo, whitewashed lyrics. And then George Clinton told me, P-Funk, he's like, dude, Jerry Lee Lewis would have been the first shake, rattle, and roller. Elvis wasn't shaking originally. They had to put him into and make him a digestible artist, and they couldn't call it rhythm and blues because that was black music, so they called it rock. And I just want to know, and maybe you weren't hip to it at the time, but were you into the real, authentic R&B stuff, or the white?
Not too much. We had there was a college station in Dallas, WRR, and it was such a weak signal. I lived in Fort Worth, so that's an hour's drive away. But at night, when I guess a lot of the other stations went off the air or something,
sure.
I could hear it. It was between the main rock station in Dallas and the main rock station in Fort Worth, and right between them was WRR. And they would play jazz, and the kind of jazz they would play would be Jerry Mulligan and kind of cool jazz.
Yeah, West Coast.
Of course, my little transistor radio, I didn't get any bass, and Jerry Mulligan didn't have any keyboards on his record, so I was just hearing spangling drums.
There was no low end on it. Holy cow, that's so great.
So it was hard for me to get a handle on it. Earlier, Take Five had been a big hit, and Young Holt Unlimited had a jazz kind of thing that was kind of a hit.
Really?
Martin Denny had a thing, the Quiet Village, I think, or something like that. It was a little bit exotic, but it got on pop radio, right?
Right.
So I was way open. I loved Take Five. I had no horn or anything yet in my music, but I was already attracted to that. Radio had either that kind of jazz, or they had like Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker, you know, a guy sitting down in front of a microphone with a guitar playing the blues. So it was like from the super simple to the super complex on this station, and then a quarter to the hour they would have a comedy and there were comedy records back then. It was either Jonathan Winters or Bob Newhart.
No Red Fox or anything like that?
George Carlin, by the way, was the DJ at the local radio station.
Dude, Carlin was the hippest cat, man. He used to go to the Playboy Club in New Orleans when Johnny Vodakovich was there and just hang out with those guys. And what a cat, man. What a great hip cat. I mean,
he was a great DJ. He was hilarious.
Oh my God.
But he did all the DJ stuff you're supposed to do. But he, you know, they got echo machines and and these radio stations and did their announcement. It was like slap echo, you know, so that real 50s sounding thing. And so he would put that on, and they had this trick. I guess they put some sort of filter on it for your weather report, as though it's coming from your weather tower. And he invented this guy, and it's probably the same guy that he did in his later routines, your hippy-dippy weatherman. But he didn't call it that. But he would climb up, you know, he would make sound effects of him climbing up into the tower, changed his voice, and did pretty hilarious weather reports.
That is so priceless, my God. That is priceless stuff. And he was totally an unknown at that time. Did you, you know, was there, you know, because a lot of cats don't really know this, but, you know, Steve Miller and Boz Scaggs, those cats came from money, and they were down in that area.
Yeah, I didn't know them personally. The first I heard of Steve Miller was T-Bone Burnett, who I went to school with. He had discovered that first album and was playing it for me in the 60s.
I'm sorry,
that's where I heard Steve Miller. Boz Scaggs, I didn't really know very well. I guess I'd met him in passing, but I never played with him.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Delbert McClinton, I knew of him. He was kind of a, half a generation sooner than me, and was he had a great group that we would go and hear, sneak in.
I'm trying to think. Were you going to those barbecue joints that he was playing at? I think Cornell. No,
I went to the Tracer Club, I think it was called. And they were, razor cut hair, the nice shiny suits, showbiz, light blue, shark skin suits, whatever.
No, this is what I want. This is what I wanted to ask
you.
Yeah.
They were really rocking it good. I mean, the real thing. The groove is the groove, and it was loose and tight at the same time. If you know what I mean.
Well, actually, you know what I want, because I know what you mean, but I want you to. Before we go on, this is what Delbert told me in our interview. He said, I knew Cornell Dupree and Sonny Curtis. They used to play guitar with me in a beer joint called White Sands Supper Club after hours. The entire front row of the audience were guitar players.
Well, I was, my parents kept me on a short leash. I didn't get to go to many clubs back then.
I dig
they knew what they were dealing with.
They knew you were at it.
My music teacher had been my guitar teacher had been a professional musician. He said, "Don't let him do this as a profession. This is just for fun, because he's just going to end up, hooked on alcohol and drugs and just living the life of debauchery." So they kept me on a short leash, but I still heard some stuff, but I didn't. The local guy was Ray Sharp. I got to hear him a little bit. But
when did you for better or for worse, parents, you're not the only one that has been on tight leashes, but was there a definitive moment when you had a band and you guys started to was there, I'm not saying a Chitlin circuit, but did you have a band prior to moving to LA where you had some real experience playing road dog in it, for lack of a better word?
Well, we did. Yeah, I had a band. That same band that did all the instrumentals grew into a band that later became Blood Rock. But at that time, it was the Naturals, and
Wow.
we changed our name to the Crowd Plus One. But we did gigs every Friday and every Saturday, and there were fraternity gigs around. There were sock hops. There were Battle of the Bands. During the British invasion days. And so, yeah, we learned all the Beatles, Birds, Joe Tex, Sam and Dave. We had a pretty good then. But we would hear James Brown when he came into town. We were like the only 4 white guys in the whole building at a theater.
It was James Brown and the Flames at that time.
I think probably so.
Oh my God! You were the 4 white cats in the building. Your parents are like, "We lost control of Dean tonight. We don't know where he is."
Well, they knew I was going out with these older guys to hear some music, and so I'm not sure they actually zoned in exactly what we were doing, but it was all on the books and all fine. And when I finally got into college at North Texas, which was a big jazz, jazz school, I would sit in at a local club called the Flamingo Club in Fort Worth, which was an all-black club, but they'd have an open mic thing on Sunday afternoons, and it would broadcast on the local jazz station.
Wow.
And so I would go in and take either my soprano or my alto. I had learned horns in high school, which took me into literacy musically. I kind of knew the chords when I could see them, and I started in as the guitar player in the stage band, they called it, which was a big band, 8 brass and 5 saxes and 4 rhythm, and but I ran into exactly what you're talking about as far as the only literate musicians versus the only illiterate musicians. And I was pretty illiterate, but I could play by ear, and these guys were fascinated by that. They were in the jazz band.
I love
reading
this.
The parts,
you were a total street scholar, yeah.
Yeah. So one guy came to me and said, "Would you write out Take 5 for me?" I said, "Well, sure I will." And I didn't know how to write out Take 5, but I kind of figured it out, and I knew where the notes were, and I just got this manuscript paper you get at the music store that looks like children's manuscript paper, sort of.
Absolutely.
And I sort of learned to read music by writing it.
So you would say that it's so funny you bring this up. I mean, I know you were pretty just a young cat, but Steve Kuhn, great piano player, played with Train, played with Kenny Durham, and kind of gets overlooked, still with us. He said
What's
to me,
his name again?
Steve Kuhn, Kuhn. He was really in that milieu with on the East Coast with same discussion as Bill Evans and Don Free. These very, very intricate, intense, but not overly talkative pianist. But what he told me, I was just transcribing my interview with him, and he goes, "I was blessed with absolute pitch, and if there was a particular part of somebody's solo that I liked, I could hear it and I could play it. I eventually got tired of that and recognized I had to play me and what's coming from me." But that sounds exactly, you were able to just pull songs apart. You had absolute pitch.
Well, no. I think, is that absolute pitch meaning if you hear a C, you know it's a C?
I think again, this cat went to Harvard.
I had relative pitch.
You have relative.
I knew the 1, 3, 5 of a chord, and I could tell what scale steps from playing by ear, right? And knowing that I'm on the 5th fret, and I'm playing an A. It's like an F chord, but on the 5th fret, and I knew I could play anything I could hear that was reasonably tonal.
Were you? I mean, this is so insane how it's coming full circle, but. Were you in the Fowler, Blue Lou, Bones class at North Texas, or were you before them?
Lou Marini, you're talking about?
Yeah, they did the Lab 68 is a seminal record. I'm just trying to figure out when you were there. What and who?
You know, I'm getting a lot of garble from your
Okay. Let me see
from
that.
your
Yeah.
side.
No, in '68, North Texas did a lab band record with Bruce Fowler, Blue Lou Marini, Tom Bones Malone. Very intricate charts. And I'm just,
Yeah.
I think, were you part? And I know Gary Grant, the trumpet player, was there. But who was in your class at North Texas?
Well, I was probably 2 years behind those guys. I started at North Texas in 1965.
Oh, you were before them. You were before them.
Well, I was, but you work your way up in the bands there. So I was in the lower bands. You know, they label their bands by the time of day they meet, and the top band was the 1 o'clock band. That's when class started.
Wow, thank you. I always wondered why that was
3
like
o'clock,
that.
4 o'clock. There wasn't 5 o'clock. There was a 6 and a 7. So I was in 6 and 7 and 3 and 2 a little bit, and playing horn mainly at school. I
That's
did play
incredible. That's
guitar.
Were
in
you
one band, and I played a horn in one of the other bands. But I would listen to that band. Great band. 67 to 68 both were just, I mean, world class. Doesn't get any better. Well, what North Texas had was all these seasoned players who had 2-3 years of college coming because they'd been in the service bands like the Airmen of Note, the NORAD band.
Absolutely.
So here you had seasoned guys that had been on the road basically for 4 years doing these service bands who were kick-ass bands, and they were you were trying out against them to push your way into a band. So it was ferocious competitively, but it wasn't unfriendly. It was just you had to do it to get to be there. You weren't going to get put in a band because you signed up for a course.
Oh no, I mean it's exactly no, and I feel like grading, GRADING, can be grating, and I think that I just know from interviewing Fowler and Bones, and I just interviewed Blue Lou. I mean, there, like you talked about, there was open mics, but they were playing rodeo gigs or R&B gigs. I mean, those guys were playing on the bandstand 6 nights a week.
There was a bulletin board, and Les Elgart,
right.
I can't remember the other names, but Les Brown do their gigs. So yeah, you could work weekends. I got in on some of that. Of course, I kind of had a split personality musically during college because Fridays and Saturdays I was still playing with this rock group, and it was a little annoying, at first because all the hip music was jazz, and that's what I was really into.
Mm-hmm.
And so the jazz gigs I would do is that if we didn't have a gig, I could take one of those gigs on the board and play lead alto for Les Elgart. That was fantastic because Larry Elgart was like one of my favorite lead alto players. I thought it was just so great.
How cool is that?
But of course, they had to play a couple of rock tunes, and
right.
And some of the guys told him that Dean plays guitar too. So when it was toward the end of the night, there were 2 or 3 rock tunes, I played guitar. And soon he loved that so much that he stopped hiring me for sax and just hired me for guitar. So I stopped taking the gigs.
Are there, I just think that because I hear you as, I love how individualistic your guitar playing is. Are you willing to say that there are tapes in the vault of Dean Parks blowing alto?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's.
Can we
Lab
get some of that?
I'm the lead alto player on Lab 69.
That was pressed on record?
Yeah.
Oh my! Your lead alto on that?
Yeah.
Oh my God! I gotta find a copy of that. I've never seen that record. That's it's been so long. I like I said, 10 plus years into my show, Dean. I know that you follow my work on Facebook and stuff. It all comes from these interviews, and I was like trying to think of to encapsulate one audio soundbite from an interview that would capture the essence of my show. And so we have a game on this program called Name That Voice, and I wanted to put this in for you. Take a listen to it, and we'll come back.
Okay.
I think that no matter what happens, humans never really changes. I mean, we all have a heart. We all come from the spirit. You know, I think what happens is over a period of time or through culture and the cultural erosion and whatever you want to call it, our spirits and our souls get covered with a lot of complexity and a lot of garbage. You know, that what we are as people, what we are as humans, what we are as beings gets covered with a lot of trash. But what we are, in essence, is always there, because it has to be there, because that's what we are. So, you know, when something comes along, like something beautiful or something energetic or something that's inspiring, it rekindles that natural essence that's in all of us. And that's why you see different things happen at different times, you know, because people are made of love. People are made of hope. And if there's an opportunity for something that shows up that illustrates that, then it plugs that energy into people again. You know, so even though things look dark, or even though things look manipulated and whatever you want to call it right now, there's a lot of terminology.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what we are is infinite. What we are is always there.
Mr. Dean Parks, you want to take a guess at who that is?
Well, it sounds like Ernie Watts.
Well, you are 1 for 1, my friend. It's the baseball playoffs. You got a nice double to the gap there. That interview could have been done yesterday. I did that interview June 25th, 2011. And, you know, I looked, you know, and Ernie has gone on and been a leader in his own right, but my favorite Ernie Watts is as a sideman in the studios. And I just, you know, Dean, I've interviewed Menza and Keltner and everybody. I mean, you're just part of the brotherhood and sisterhood. And I just wanted you to talk about, like, you talked about this. We are living in a dog-eat-dog society right now, not just musically. It's just win at all costs. And you talked about this thing. It was competitive, but it wasn't nasty. It was inclusive. It was a brotherhood. Part of that had to do with there was enough work to go around. But
yeah,
can you talk about either demystify or in fact, you know, talk to me about this camaraderie that existed amongst, you know, 4 dozen musicians or more. This beautiful tapestry of cats who created all these incredible records. Yeah, the leaders were great. They obviously had talent. None of those records would have been hits without you guys. And I just wanted you to talk about what Ernie was talking about, the idea of, you know, you and Sklar and Durgy and all these guys. I mean, you guys would come in before the sun went up, the sun came up, and you'd leave before the sun went down. You're tired after that, but you have to rekindle that essence. And I just wanted you to talk any way you wanted to about how you cultivated that and the spirit of those times when you came out to Los Angeles.
Well, my first, what we'd call, I guess, my A-range gig, I did a couple of albums when I first got to town, but there was this gig, and I had been on the road with Sonny and Cher, and they got the summer TV show, and Sonny insisted that the players in his rhythm section get auditions, which was unheard of. I mean, this was like 3 hours. You had to do all the music. It was all pre-recorded, the music part for the band. And but you had to get it done, because guess what? It's in the mill. You're doing vocals after we do our thing, and I'm not talking about whatever the latest rock and roll music or country music was of the day. And so for Sonny to go out on the limb and do that was such a great thing. But what it did is it got me, on the first day, they weren't absolutely sure I could cut it. So they had Larry Carlton there as guitar one, and that's when I met Larry Carlton. And I'd been told about this guy, but he was an incredible player. he had all the jazz knowledge and rock knowledge, but he had the solidity of a rock player when he was playing jazz, but the tonal knowledge of a jazz player when he was playing rock.
I love the perfect description. That is exactly how I hear it, except I'm not. I love. Thank you so much. That's what it is. Yeah.
And so I was fascinated by Larry Carlton and his technique, and and I guess I had a few things that he enjoyed too.
Yeah, I'm sure you had some stuff to offer.
He had never seen a guitar player use a volume pedal. I used that to pedal back to rhythm level. Just kind of mixed myself, and then it was time to take a solo or something. I would lean into the volume pedal which would push the amp, and so I was kind of ready to go as far as that goes.
Whoa.
And we just clicked immediately musically in this way. Usually, the arrangers did not have a great idea of how to notate a rock guitar part, or if it were notated, had much faith that it would be read accurately, because a lot of guitar players were sort of feel players, like James Burton and Jerry Cole, who later became the other guitar player on the Sonny and Cher show. Tremendous ear, great everything, great musicianship, but they're not going to be reading fly shit on the music paper.
Right, they were feel players. I mean,
they were feel
magical
players.
Yeah,
and I could do a little of both. But anyway, we'd get a rhythm chart, and it would just be chord slashes with this arranger. One of his favorite words was swamp. Okay, swamp. Well, it's kind of halftime, Hendrix kind of thing.
I love this swamp.
Or Curtis Mayfield, they would say, that means the little fourths and the little flowery guitar fills that Curtis Mayfield might do. And other than that, it's just like count it off, you hear it, and you come up with a part. And with me and Larry, from the very first count off, whoever had the strongest idea for the thing, would lay it down, and the other guy would play something completely out of the way of that and completely supportive of the rhythm section or of that part.
I love this. Are you kidding? Is that was that? Can I just be clear? Are you, without really knowing? Is that fair to say that you guys were the first to kind of do that?
Oh, I don't think we were the first. I think what they call the Wrecking Crew now, which was the sort of the generation that came up with the Beach Boys and the first rock records that were done in L.A.
Well, no, but Tedesco didn't have a Parks or a Carlton alongside him,
though. That's true. I mean,
I'm talking about the double guitar theme.
Before, I think Louis Shelton was the first of the three of us. Louis first, then Larry, and then me.
Right.
Who were guitar players that could sort of be at home in any style. We came up liking rock and roll music. The guys that were in the studio scene before us didn't really like rock. They do it and they get it, kind of, and they know you're supposed to trash it up and you play loud.
Trash it up. Oh my God, this is.
But we liked it.
This concept,
jazz, because we come up right on that cusp.
This concept though of someone would lead with the foundational idea, and then another guitar player would go off. I mean, you go back to '69 in New York. I vetted this pretty hard with McLaughlin and Cobham. I mean, there'd be soundtracks going on with 4 guitar players in the studio at one time. David T. Walker talked about that too. He always used to play.
Yeah, I was in those sessions with David. There'd be 4 guitar parts.
But I mean, this idea of like theme, like the Sonny and Cher thing, like the idea where one guitar player, like Tedesco, those albums are ridiculous. I mean, but it was you had vibes, piano, drums, one guitar. The dual guitar themes with someone holding it down with the theme, and then somebody going off and doing something totally different. That seems somewhat revolutionary in the studio, but I don't know what was going on in New York at the time.
Well, it wasn't revolutionary in records, and we were emulating records. Records were done with the band would rehearse it, and everybody would work out their part, and then go in and do a record. I'm talking about a self-contained band. We didn't have, that was not going to happen. The music didn't exist.
No,
probably before
this is
7
why it's
a.m.
so magical, though, man. Also, you would say the arrangers were coming out of a symphonic West Coast jazz bag, and not the rock was so foreign to them.
Yeah,
They didn't really know how to write for
They
it.
were dependent on the players. You know, Chuck Rainey mentioned that to me. I don't know if you talked with Chuck.
Yes, many times.
Because he did New York for a while, and then he came out to L.A. in '73 or so. And I met him on the Let's Get It On album, I think, with Marvin. And he was surprised that that producers were suggesting for him to change his sound and were telling him what parts to play. Because in New York, it was like they hired Chuck Rainey and Bernard Purdie and Cornell Dupree and Eric Gale, because guess what? They can't make it up, and these guys can.
That's exactly right. No, I mean that's so because I remember it's just
so there was both in L.A. There was both. You play this part, we wrote it. The whole arrangement is fitting around this part. You kind of had to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And
you guys were geniuses, man. If I was a producer,
we don't have a clue. Please help us.
Well, no, but this is interesting because they brought those cats in, Richard T. and Chuck Bernard. You do your thing. We'll stay out of the way. And then there were cats that producers that Gene Page, or I don't even know who would be it, but somebody would actually tell them what to play. And for Chuck, that was I just remember. I'll go back to a quick story. When I interviewed Steve Swallow, the bass player, in 16. Again, this is an album in '69 on the East Coast, New York, which has that New York attitude. Don't tell me what to do. I can do it myself, or I'm going to make the and there's this album Gary Burton did called Good Vibes, and Arif Mardin was arranging, and Joel Dorn. Jazz was waning in popularity. It was more the Hendrix and the Creams and the fusion swamp stuff that you've been talking about that was popular. Dorn was trying to make some of Burton's tunes radio friendly, and so Bernard and Chuck were on the album. And then there was another rhythm section, I think, with maybe Swallow and Roy Haynes or somebody. Anyway, Swallow brought in an original tune. And Arif came in and started to tell him how to play his own tune. And Swallow said he got very surly and it didn't go very well. And it's so interesting because that was the rugged New York attitude. Like, you hired us to do what we do. But it doesn't feel to me with Parks and Carlton, when I hear you guys, it feels like you have, no matter what, whether people told you or not, it doesn't sound like you were restricted at all. I mean, to me, there's a common theme in my generation of micromanaging to the point where you strip somebody of whatever they are supposed. Why did you hire them in the first place? I mean, that's what Coltrane.
Well, there's all kinds of gigs, though. I mean, there are those gigs where the imagined music is the product, not what we imagine.
That's right.
And so you need to be able to pull that off. I mean, I don't say you need to, but if you want a whole lot of gigs, you need to be able to. It'd be nice to do both. And so you can never tell which way a session will turn either. How specific it'll all of a sudden get.
Would you say that, like, I mean, it helps that Sonny or people like that, I mean, they had such credibility that, like, would Marvin play a drum feel for people? Like, because I mean,
no.
Okay, because
I think it was, any input he had was probably with the arrangers with all the Motown-oriented sessions. I'm talking about with kind of a funk undercurrent, but
Dean
a
Parks
orchestrated
special,
top.
Oh,
orchestrated
God.
top.
Dude, the Mac, I forgot. That's my favorite Dean Parks album, is the Mac. It's just the funkiest. This is the thing.
What album is that?
Well, that was the original motion picture soundtrack, Willie Hutch, the Mac. Dude, okay. That is the funkiest. Clarence McDonald is all over that album. You are Ed Green. It is the funkiest album. But here's the thing. This is the inside story that I was told. Is that so? Motown, for better or for worse, Berry Gordy moved the entire operation to L.A., Dennis Coffey felt like he should have kept the music in Detroit and done more movie stuff out there, but that's all water under the bridge. Jamerson was out there on his own, as those guys were kind of cast your fate to the wind, like they and he was also a kind of he wasn't in great shape with his addictions, and so he was unreliable. So, the idea was when Motown moved out there, they're like, okay, they wanted Gene Page to write out what he thought Jamerson's bass parts would be, and nobody could play them except Wilton Felder, because he was a sax player and he could read flypaper. All right, so then he became this studio. So how did you work your way into Motown in that sense? Because my favorite Motown is not the acoustic soul of the late '60s. It's the Dean Parks, Ed Green, Gadsden, ridiculous funk of the early '70s.
Yeah, it was totally fun to be on.
Oh my God, man!
When I started getting those calls, I thought, okay, well then I moved to the right place, because this is the good thing. Because let's face it, a lot of the other stuff was Partridge Family and Brady Bunch kind of stuff, which paid well.
Whatever, that's still pretty hip. But this was like dance.
But this was like, you're kidding? Joe Sample and Wilton Felder? Yeah, that's okay. That's good.
Can you talk about a memorable? I mean, what was that? Must have. I mean, Wilton. He's in my third book. I interviewed Wilton, thank God, before he left, and Joe. Those guys are so. They to me are like the heroes of our time. I mean, can you talk about working a session with those guys? And I mean, I know Joe would not yell at people, but he would, say, "Get that Holy Ghost going." I mean, those guys were like so. I mean, I wasn't even around. I wasn't even conceived, but I can feel it through the music, how ridiculously burning the music. It was fun, man. It wasn't tedious. It was. I mean, I'm sure there were times where it was tedious, but to me, you could hear the fun that you guys were having in the music. Was there, David Spinoza told me that Right Place, Wrong Time, Dr. John tune, Arif Mardin and Dr. John were in Atlantic. Spinoza was running out the door to do a jingle session. It's like 73. They said, yo, man, hey, come in here. We need, originally there was going to be a sax solo, but they said, we want you to put a guitar solo on this. All the rhythm had been laid down. And so Spinoza's like, I got 20 minutes. They're like, that's fine. So he plugs in. He plays this tune, but he kind of like was a little bit too hyped up and bent a string too much. And basically what he said was he hit a clam, total clam. And it was like, so he finished his take and he looks at Arif and he's like, all right, let me do it one more time. They're like, nope, that's perfect. Absolutely perfect. You're done. And he left. And so that tune starts to get huge radio play. And a few weeks later, he's got like 6 guitars over his shoulder, getting into a taxi cab, and the cab driver's like, check this out, man. This is my favorite. This is my new favorite tune. And he turns it up, and it's Right Place, Wrong Time. And Spinoza's like, hey, that's me on guitar. And the guy's like, you're full of crap, man. He didn't believe. But was there ever a session that you can remember where you were like, okay, I played the wrong note, or it was a clam, but it actually made the tune?
Yep. The first number one record I was on, I had a solo, and it was The Rockin' Pneumonia by Johnny Rivers.
Wow.
And the solo that I played, I bent up too far on a note. It was a new guitar. We were all trying to get 335s because Larry Carlton had such a great sound with the 335. So I had a 335 I didn't know very well. And I overbent one note, and I just went with it and kind of bent back to it, but even a little bit more in tune, so that it seemed like I meant it. And there it was, and sure enough, we had taken another take, and the take wasn't as good as the take that he kept, which had that on it. So, and Joe Osborne still ribbed me about it. I saw him at the NAMM show 30 years later and said, remember that part? You overbent that note.
Wait, I just want to say, that track became the radio hit?
Yeah, that's the hit.
Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu, that was off L.A. Reggae.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God. So, I mean, how fun is that? Like, because in today's world, I'm telling you, well, you know this better than anybody, but younger cats, they don't get that. They're hung up on perfection. Technology can fix everything now.
Yeah, I know. It's that's the good news and the bad news.
Exactly.
But yeah, back then there was repairs could be done, but it was tedious. You were stopping the flow to really punch in, and plus punching out is risky because analog's not like digital. You can't just roll the region back to the right spot and get it. The engineer also had to be dead accurate on where the in is and where the out is. And by the way, those analog machines are not all the same on as far as the lag from the punch in and from the punch in punch with the finger and the actual recording on the machine. Each brand of machine had a different gap between the record head and the erase head. And so you had to know that engineer was able to pull it off to do a repair. Not impossible, but it's kind of a big Megillah. So yeah, it was nice to get it all done at the.
It's just so cool, but it's also like, I mean, the amount. I mean, you don't want to like flub something and it takes away from the essence of the tune. But so, I mean, even I just was transcribing my interview with Mark Farner from Grand Funk Railroad, and when those guys were in the studios, like if they jammed up a tune, even if there was a mistake, if they liked the feel of it, they kept it. Like, I mean, it's like it's. Anyway, I want to read this quote to you, and then have you riff on it. This from Craig Durgee.
Yeah.
And he said to me, I wound up being an acoustic piano player. That was my first love. The acoustic piano was what I was working with in the first studio bands at Quantum Studios in Torrance, California.
Uh-huh.
One of my first studio bands was me, Jim Keltner, Joe Osborne, and Larry Carlton. All those dates were just acoustic piano. I haven't discovered the Fender Rhodes yet. I haven't discovered the Oberheim or the Mini Moog. And he was talking about doing Fat Albert sessions there. And I just, like, can you talk about some of the, not Sunset Sound or Motown Studios, but some of the really funky off the beaten path studios that when you first got out there that you were just picking up work at?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of any obscure ones. It's ones that you would have heard of Sound Recorder, Sound Factory, Wally Hyder's Sound.
That was above show.
United and Western, which later became Ocean Way, and now it's East and West and back to United.
That's fine. I have another Name That Voice for you. Just pay attention to the content, and we'll come back.
Okay.
Buck Sexton, The Morning Blaze with Doc Thompson.
I don't have it queued up. But I was going to play you a clip of Stanley Clarke talking about having some drinks with Wayne Shorter, and Wayne Shorter said to him that the only way that you can really play music in a spiritual way is that you have to be operating on a frequency. And the essence is, it's like going to the store to get your grandma some milk. It's this overarching love that goes beyond what we think our concept of love is. It's a certain frequency, a devotion. I guess that's the best way to say it. And that's hard to do when you're in a studio setting with, like you said, very strict parts and things like that. But I wanted you to aesthetically, when I hear the Willie Hutch soundtrack or the Evie Sands records, or I know the Dan had like huge budgets and things like that, but it's this idea of going beyond this physical plane. It's about ascension, and it's about ultimately serving the song and listening with your peers. And I wanted you to talk about that concept, even if it goes back to your early days of playing rock and rockabilly, it's just the idea of playing in a group, the concept of, in order to really play transcendent music, it's like going to the store to get your grandma some milk.
Well, I'm not sure I can latch onto that grandma milk.
But in your own way, though.
I can tell you, though, that I think all the guys that I came up with absolutely worshipped the music we had listened to coming up. And the fact that we were in a setting with, excellent sound system, greatest players, and we could make something that great. I think everybody was just hungry to make an ideal experience out of this piece of music, whatever it was. And I think we try to do that with any level of gig that we had. There was an ideal that kind of hadn't been reached. Like when we heard Ed Green play, we had to get him into the Motown sessions. He was kind of chomping at the bit, waiting to get in, and we knew how great he was. And it was a little crusade to get him in there so we get to play with him, and then we can make records better than they'd ever been made before, or hope to get there, or hope to get as good as the records that we'd made. So it was I used to listen on headphones to Beatles records and hear what they were doing. Oh yeah, the doubled vocals over there. And I kind of got into arranging when I got into high school big band and in college. So I sort of thought of music as an arranger, which is also, by the way, a thing that studio players have in that time, is that every guy in there could have been the arranger of the rhythm track, and in fact was arranging their own part and listening to the other parts for context. By the way, they do that and have done that in Nashville as well. Big ears. What's right for the song? What's the song saying? And are we doing something that's taking it forward, or are we doing something that's taking it down? And I think everybody was just really wanted to be on, wanted to make a really great environment. And so when we were on a session with a great engineer and you hear the playback on those big speakers, it would be very inspiring. And
I would be crying. I'd be crying.
We weren't thinking about the scale, the payment, or the overtime, or any of that stuff. We were thinking about, how good can this be? Is it that good yet? Can it be better? And I don't know. It seemed like a collective for excellence. I think everybody was doing that.
Were you conscious of composition and arranging? Because I remember Ernie and Menza, if you tried to get a lead to buy a house, if you put musician, you'd never get qualified. So if you put arranger or were you hip to that? Like, did you have those?
Good trick. No, I never. They never told me about that trick.
I mean,
to tell you the truth, I didn't want much of that pressure when I came to town. I could do so many things. I could do woodwinds and guitars and arrange and kind of produce and put things together. And I didn't. First of all, I wasn't quite sure I was up to speed on just the guitar. And it was so inspirational hearing all the great guitar, Louis and Larry and Dennis Budimir and Tedesco. And, that would send me home practicing, just hearing, oh, man, how did that happen? I kind of wore out my chops practicing on the one day of the week I wasn't working, practicing all day, trying to see if I could get a handle on what these guys were doing. It was the best players I'd ever heard.
What made them so beautiful? I mean, like, I listened to this David Axelrod album about the environment. I think Budimir's on it, and it's just like Earl Palmer. So you got some, because all those cats were, I mean, literally I just got off the phone with George Young, the multi-reed player, session cat, and I mean, he talked about being in Wildwood, New Jersey, seeing Coltrane walking the bar with an R&B band. I mean, it was pretty basic chords that went into bebop. But a lot of that was like, those cats were like, I guess it was just all about making the song feel good. And there wasn't all this machinery. Can you talk about, especially early on, I mean, like, you know, I don't know, not so much the, you know, the sessions when everybody was hitting at the same time, you know, like Gene Page, like, I remember Kemper telling me about some of the miking techniques, especially on the drums, that someone like Glyn Johns might have had, or the guy Malo from Chess Records. It might just be one a left and right overhead and one for the kick drum.
Yeah, the Glyn Johns is basically 3 mics and then an extra mic for kick, I think.
Right. So, like, how would they...
Or 2 mics.
If there were, like, if it was you and, you know, Carlton or Tack, like, if there were, like, 4... Like, how would they mic all the guitar... Or how would they even mic a single guitar? All I'm saying is the music that I'm referring to that maybe preceded you but also bled into your career, there's just so much space in the music, and it has a lot to do with miking. It has less, it's not about analog digital, it has to do with miking techniques. You don't need to place a mic on every piece of the drum. The music doesn't breathe.
Yeah, well, as more tracks and as consoles got bigger, they just took advantage of that. Yeah, there's the phasing issues with a lot of drum mics leaking into each other and kind of throwing the phase off. That where people like the fewer mics, the better on drums.
Well, what about? Can you talk about some of the?
Yeah, it's just one mic on a guitar usually, and if it's a guitar amp, just an SM57, Shure SM57. Pointed at the speaker. We were all surprised that we could work a 10-to-1 session, and with our little Princeton amp and our whatever guitar we're playing at the time, and then we go to a 2-to-5 session, and the guitar sounded great at 10-to-1, and it sounded horrible on the second session.
Wow!
And we kind of couldn't figure it out. It was sounded the same from the amp, but what they were getting was different, and I became hip to the fact that if you put the mic right in the middle of the speaker, it's not going to sound good. It sounds extremely bright, like too bright. And so you might get off axis. I noticed the Joe Sador that recorded for Johnny Rivers also would use a lot of compression. But a lot of compression kind of made it sound like a record already. You know, rather than cutting flat.
Holy cow, I can't believe this is the most raw. This is so important. You're telling me that after a while you actually, in that 2-to-5 sessions, when you would actually, you'd reposition the mic because you knew.
Yeah, well, diplomatically I would reposition my hand.
Holy cow, man. So who were some...
You don't want to hear them moving their mic.
Absolutely. So you would... Yeah, like...
But yeah, I like the mic close in as possible and kind of halfway between the center of the speaker and the rim of the speaker. So you have to know what the speaker looks like behind the grill. I'm not talking about the speaker grill, but the speaker itself. And that started sweetening up all the guitar sounds, I thought, at least from what I was wanting. I can't really play if the sound is too brittle. I just don't want to make notes.
Absolutely.
So it kind of has to sound good, and it kind of has to be in tune for me to even be able to chime in. If I'm having tuning problems with the guitar, it's like it's hard to go.
Do you remember? I mean, every track off side A of that Evie Sands album. Again, that was '75, and things were changed. You know, every one of those songs to me on that first side could have been radio friendly. And I just wonder, do you remember the first time you heard yourself on driving in the car? Because I mean, one of my third book, one of the chapters is on interconnection, and at the time, regionalism was just percolating. I mean, you had regional rhythms all over the country, and Sly Stone, the Whispers could be recording in L.A., and they get a call from their manager saying, hey, man, Sly Stone's playing your tunes up here on KDIA. So you didn't even know that you're, so, I mean, do you remember?
Yeah, my local band did a couple of records.
Either Blood Rock or before they did?
No, it was the pre-Blood Rock name, same kind of core band.
What would they call it, the Naturals?
Crowd Plus One was the name of the band.
The Crowd Plus One.
Yeah, and
who was in that band?
So we heard those on the radio. That was great.
So I'm sorry. What were you? You guys actually cut an album?
No, we cut a series of singles, a couple of singles maybe.
And
they got regional play. That was in the days before they had national program directors and national radio chains. So every local station got to program, and if we were playing a dance or something, that would be part of the, promotion of the dance, is to play our record.
I just want to be clear. This was in the Fort
Worth.
Fort Worth. Okay, so
so the first record that I played on, that might have been Rockin' Pneumonia. It was the first #1 record. I don't know. I think I played on some.
I just want to be. I'm looking here. I want to make sure that this is up to date. So I just want to be clear. The demos that you cut that got regional play.
They were actually on a record label. They were on Uni Records, Universal.
So the Crowd Plus One was on Uni.
I think so.
You have some 45s of were there some albums cut of that? Is that available?
Yeah, you can find them too. I think they're hanging around on YouTube.
So let me ask you, because what it says here, 1969, they're spotlighting as your inaugural session, spotlighting the man Bobby Blue Bland. And then then 1971.
Well, I
arrived
in town in 1970, so if it was cut in L.A., then the date is wrong.
Right. No. It seems the fully ensconced L.A. Parks, 1971 on Capitol was a Helen Reddy record.
Yeah, that could be. Mm-hmm.
So when you were firmly, and that was, my God. Now this is insane, because you had Budimir, Carlton, and Parks all listed as guitar players on this. I guess there were multiple sessions. Did you come out around the same time? And did you know a dear friend of mine, Ronnie Tutt?
Sure.
Okay,
well, that was one of my encouragers that encouraged me that I might do okay in L.A. It was Ron Tutt, because he had worked. Dallas was quite a vibrant commercial music, a jingle scene, and I'd worked with him some there before he moved to L.A. Him and Larry Mahobarak.
Well, I mean, there's the legendary story that was in my first book that he told me about his audition for Elvis when someone was trying out for, I think it might have been even Ed Green. Tutt brought his drum set out there. Mahobarak had him come out from Dallas. Ed Green just killing it. The band's having a great time. Ronnie Tutt he is slouching down in his chair. He's like, the guy's on my drum set. I haven't even had a chance to play, and he's taking my gig. And so Ed Green gets off. The guys are wrapping up, putting their instruments away. Elvis is, and Muhabarak, Larry goes over to the colonel and said, hey, I brought this cat out from Dallas. He came all the way out here to rehearse, to try out. So, let's give him a shot. And Tutt gets up there, and he said within a couple of minutes, everybody was smiling and having a ball, and that's how he got the gig. I was just one of the most magical stories, really.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I mean, it was just. Did you, obviously you were just going back to the horn stuff. Were you like an Ornette Dolphy freak, or more like a R&B player in the horn stuff?
No, in fact, one reason I kind of backed out of horn put my shingle out for sessions is because I liked jazz on sax. I I didn't like playing rock on sax that much and competing with loud electric instruments. I just didn't like that environment. But so I liked that, like I say, Desmond on Take 5.
Yes.
I really liked that sound. I liked Larry Earlgard. I liked Bud Shank, the way he sounded in Gerald Wilson's band. Johnny Hodges. I liked the Marshall Royal. I'm not thinking of lead alto players. As far as tenor goes, I liked Zoot Sims, Coltrane, not Sonny Rollins so much as something.
Stan Getz kind of thing?
Stan Getz a little bit, but I really like Zoot. I thought Zoot was a little more straightforward than Stan Getz.
Sure.
For that soft, cool thing. And Coltrane was, was great for ripping through a big band with a Coltrane sound. That was kind of an ideal. I'd heard Billy Harper at North Texas also. It was great.
Oh my God, he's a dear friend. I love that cat, man.
He sounded so good in that North Texas band. We used to go. Our band director when I was in high school, 1962 through 65, he knew all the studio guys, and he was very hip to North Texas, and he would take us up, or we'd all kind of go up together to Denton, which is an hour drive from Fort Worth, and hear the spring and fall concerts, North Texas, and hear those bands. He wanted us to hear what a real jazz big band sounded like. Man, those were ripping. But yeah, Lou Marini, I became a big Lou Marini fan. He was playing lead alto with the bands when I first heard them.
Dude, it's all coming full.
Billy Harper was playing ride tenor, and it was a pretty great band.
Burning spiritual people. I wanted to read this to you. This is my interview with Budimer, because I always ask the cats, everybody from the great Emil Richards and the great Gene Stone was this great drummer, kind of unheralded cat. This is what Budimer told me, one of the great jazz jobs I ever had was with the late Bud Shank and now the late Gary Peacock. It was me, Bud, Gary Peacock, and Chuck Flores on drums. When I met Gary Peacock, I went, holy crap. We worked at a little club called the Drift Inn in Malibu. Some tunes would last 45 minutes. Bud would play the tune, take a solo, and get off the stand. It would be me, Gary, and the drummer. And the two of us, Peacock and myself, weren't playing free, but it was pretty incredible. Bud didn't care, and management never complained, so I guess it was cool. And I always, I know you came out in the 70s, so you weren't there in the 60s, but, I always talk to these guys, where would you go to, because, you were making good bread in the studio, so you could go and play for free at night. And I'm like, where was Parks? Was it the Baked Potato? Was there an off the beat? Where were the clubs that you guys would go and just have a ball playing?
I got so busy with studios, I didn't really have a chance much to play live.
Yeah, you were like Lee Sklar, dude. You nonstop,
Well, yeah, there was a lot of work. If you think about it, here's Motown moving to L.A., and you already had L.A. in L.A., and you've got a lot of New York action was moving to L.A., and Glenn Campbell made country music recorded in L.A. not out of the question. So there was a lot of guitar work to be done, and how many really love and play rock and roll guitar players who can read music are there? There were a few of us, and but it was not enough for the demand. So yeah, it was like a spigot. You turn it on, and there's the work. It was
it was such a variety that at the end of the day, it wasn't like you needed to.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's a variety plus the surprise factor of you're not exactly sure what you're walking into on a session.
So magical. Besides Sonny and Cher though, did you most of the there was this magical period of time when you first got out there where someone like James Taylor would have what became the section, and then they would, in some amalgamation, maybe Durgie wouldn't go, Clarence would go, but then they'd tour the album. Did you tour any albums after Sonny and Cher? Did you go on the road at all?
I only did one little stint
With Steely?
for 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 years with Dave. And that got a lot of airplay, and I played the solo on that.
I'm sorry, Dave who? Dave who?
David Gates.
David Gates. Okay, so and then
he was the singer and writer, and played all the instruments on the Bread records on the hits, except all the instruments but drums, and arranged the string section.
Whoa! And then but what song did you play lead on that got popular?
Oh, that was "Lost Without Your Love."
So you would go on the
They had already been a hit and had disbanded, and then they had a reunion in say about 1976, and so I did some touring with that band with the Bread. They had me go out, and James Griffin, who had usually played the guitar parts, he had had a falling out with David Gates, and so I was in originally to just replace Griffin, but he joined later on, and I just stayed on and played a lot of the solo parts. Anyway, I did some. There's some footage of that of our European stuff, and here and there you can find.
I cannot believe. I mean, just do you have? We've been cooking here for 75 minutes. Do you think we could do set 2 next week?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, guys, we got more to get to. I don't want to, we got a lot more to get to. Before I let you go, I wanted to know, what is your, how do you, if COVID magically disappeared tomorrow, and I know you're aware of this to a degree, but I mean, my peers and younger, and the cats that I go see and support, music has changed. The business part of it has changed so much. Intellectual properties you can't really make a lot of money on that in terms of, the days of Joni Mitchell making an album and going on tour and writing off the tour as a loss because the album sold so much that you can't make money on records. The only way you can make money in music today, if you're not outside of being some sort of iconic name, is by road dogging it. And you sell merchandise at your tables, and maybe you walk into some cool clubs and they'll cut you some money, and that's the only way you can make it. And Dean, I just wanted you to talk about, because Dizzy and Miles and those guys, they weren't millionaires. They were living okay. Train was living okay. Wes Montgomery would stop everybody on the street with an instrument and shake their hand. The amount of studio work that you guys had, you guys were considered viable, professional people. And to me, I look at our society now, and I step back and I say, musicians didn't get any of that unemployment relief during COVID. A lot of my friends, I mean, they're barely scraping by. I mean, really younger musicians. I guess music. I want you to push back on this idea.
Music is free. Yippee!
I want you to talk about why its significance is so important. Not just the music. Everybody consumes it. It's probably the best part of most people's day, but nobody wants to pay for it. And then the clubs will come up with you can pay to play, or you can play for the door. I want you to just talk to people out there about if you feel that it's hard because you lived through the gravy years, why a musician should be seen as a viable profession and not a musician's gift to the world.
Well, it was proven.
Wow.
It happened.
Right.
Musicians were getting big money because music was making movies, television, records, radio rich. And I have to say that unionization was huge. And there was already a strong union structure when I got to LA. And it was at a time when, I'm talking about when the bargains were made that I was riding on the coattails of, when those bargains were made in the 50s by some courageous musicians and some pretty bright people, pretty bright musicians who kind of stepped up to lead the conversation between management and labor. We were the labor. That made some deals that worked for everybody, and sort of cut us in on a little of the wealth. And guess what? Made it possible for, okay, well, this is paying pretty well. I'll buy a 12-string acoustic and keep it in top shape, and a 6-string acoustic, and a nylon acoustic, and a hollow body guitar, and a Strat, a Fender, this amp, that amp. It pays. And sure enough, the records got better and better and better, and the studios were being paid well because there was money in the system. You needed a strike in the 50s means that all of these products went. They were impossible to complete a movie. You could go overseas, but it wasn't that easy to get overseas back then.
Wow.
So you really
there was a strike in the 50s.
Yeah, there were strikes, and there were smart deals made after the strike, so that the companies were still doing fine.
Well, let me ask you a question, because this is, of course, you opened a Pandora's box here. Emil Richards, rest in peace. I mean, he told me when he moved out to LA, and this is just for percussionists, but you had he and Shelly Mann and Don Lamond and all these guys, percussion, Aguabella, they would meet at Emil's house on every Sunday to game plan, because what was happening is the only cats that were getting doubles were people like wind players. If you played clarinet, oboe.
Yeah.
Okay. But then Emil was like, no, man, tablas, if you play tablas and timbales and, so
it's a different world. Yeah.
So he worked in getting double scale. I have the whole quote, but the point is he advocated, and Shelley, when they went to management, it was such a convincing argument that they made a bargain. Can you point to a bar? No, I love this history. Is there a bargain that stands out that you can talk about that was conducive to the labor?
Oh, I know that in the 50s at some point, and I'm so ignorant on this, though I've heard the story.
Yeah, I know you've heard the stories.
You can find it, but a number of the musicians, and I guess it was for film, went on strike, and the cure to the strike was to form a fund based on the profitability of the film that went into the musicians union, and that fund was divided according to your participation on that film. And so that ends up being a little royalty system for musicians, and it's been great. That's a part of the bargaining. And I guess bargaining happens every 3 years with all the major labels to talk about the scales, and scales have been bargained up kind of with the consumer price index, try to be indexed. It's not an automatic index, but it's a negotiated index. But all of those things, and hours, and procedure on sessions, so that the sections became sessions before my time came in 3-hour increments, and kind of were organized in the day. And this wasn't unionization. You could call the session anytime you wanted, but it came to be that if you did it at 9 or 10 in the morning, then those guaranteed an out at 1 o'clock, that you could make a 2 o'clock session.
Right.
And so the top musicians would accept that gig because it guaranteed them the ability to get to the next gig. And in those days, you could get from a studio on one side of town to a studio on the other side of town in the 1 hour.
Yeah, right. No, did you have 12 different string instruments in your trunk? I mean, John Morell used to have that. Attack It. They'd be going from session to session with like, an
Yeah,
arsenal
exactly.
of guitars.
They began to pay for cartage. I think that was possibly percussionists and drummers maybe had that first.
Yes, Hal Blaine.
Hal Blaine had a couple of drum sets, supposedly, where he could kind of leapfrog and have it set up and ready to go.
Oh.
But yeah, you had they call it a kamikaze, the cartage guys, where they had to pack you up at 1 o'clock and get you ready to go at 2, and you just drive over to the next session and try to find a parking place.
Yeah, right. Dude,
but it's a whole industry, and it's very professional, and it is at a professional level. If it's a 10 o'clock start, you start at 10. If you don't, you can't play the session if you're not there. So those demands were strict, and that kept it as a professional thing. But there was so much work, and there was so much money coming in. The problem now, because we know all that's great, and I'm getting a great pension, by the way. You don't have to stop playing sessions to get your pension with the Musicians Union. That's totally fantastic. So I'm not hurting like some younger players are hurting, because I'm getting,
Well, let's be clear, too. I mean, the pension is near bankruptcy, too.
Well, yeah, it's.
But no, I mean, you earn. Believe me, I know what you're saying.
They're having to change the structure as we speak. They're negotiating how to do that, and this COVID thing is not, of course, making it any easier.
No.
But the fact that there's not money coming in to purchase recorded music means there's no money there to make it. It's almost a promotional product now. Not that it's not important. Assuming that live music comes back and that still is the main source of income, the records do make your audience have a new reason to come hear you when you come around this next summer as an artist. And so they still need them, but it can't be as expensive as it used to be because there's not the same money coming in. If you think about your CD budget in 1987, how much money did you spend on your CDs in 1987 or records? It was a little of both at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same as it is now. It's zero now. And you get to hear all of the great music of the world from every era for free because people put it up on YouTube and you can't get it down. You can't police it. So there it is. It exists. Great for learning. That's why you have so many virtuoso musicians now.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's not why. There's also been great education. There's a lot of very literate and capable musicians, and who are perfectly able to keep all this going. It's just that there's no money in the system because the streaming that is doing so well for all the tech companies, they've not cut in the content creators in the way that they need to be.
Yeah, it's not equitable. Deal. It's like 14,000 downloads, you get 11 cents. The thing is,
it's the fortunate thing about that is the structure is there. It's just the amounts.
That's right. No, that's a good way to look at it. But I just want to, before I let you go, when did the bean counters? Because you just basically riffed on that, and you said music, LPs, records. It's made for promotion. Before your generation, I mean, it was commercialized. It was commodified, prolific.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Big money.
So when was the demarcation point when the bean counters came in and said,
yeah, I think it was probably
79, 80?
I think it mid-80s probably.
Yeah.
And here's the way.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm kind of from a distance. I'm not a music industry insider so much. But I do know that you would, if you had an album budget of $120,000 and then you sold 500,000 records, well, guess what? It's all paid off. It's a success. Yay! Let's do another record.
You're in the black, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that in the mid '80s, I don't know if it's when computers became so ubiquitous or what, but they figured out, well, gee, how much promotion did we put in to make this thing sell 500,000? We spent like $200,000 in promotion, or 500,000, or $1 million. if we promote a Prince record, it's going to take it from a 1 million selling record to an 8 million selling record. Well, let's do that. Let's only promote Rod Stewart, who will take it from a 2 million record up to a 10 million record, 10 million selling record. That made more sense, and there you go. That's what the new structure became. And then you also had radio stations that were afraid of what they used to call tune away, which is, here comes an oddball song.
Exactly.
And well, let's go see what else is on some other station.
Well, no, but that
so
goes,
the fear of a tune away made all of the programming very homogeneous, and there became national program directors who could guarantee no tune aways and a pleasing format for people that had a narrow, had a particular taste. Where, in the old days, as we know, and everyone has talked about it, you could hear, a jazzy record and a rock record and a soul record, and all on the same station.
Dude, you would have heard Silver Apples of the Moon into Cannonball into, the Swingle Singers. It was insane.
Yeah.
And it was, and that's the issue, is that with the FM radio, the advent of losing free form, and then people wanting to make a hit, and they would just basically say, I remember a lot of drummers telling me, Gadsden told me, it was a little bit looser, I think, in Motown, but, a lot of cats would go in the studios in the mid-'70s, and the producer would say, listen, just play straight beats. Don't play yourself. Just play straight beats, because that's what the last hit was. And when the homogenization, the drum machine came in after, and most importantly, it's the ability to say, oh my God, look at this. We don't have to pay human beings to make the music. We can just make this music with machines. And so anyway, we just cooked for an hour and a half. It's such an honor to talk to you, man. Let's find a time to do set 2, okay?
Sounds great. I enjoyed it very much, Jake.
I'll get it out. I'll get it up to later today for public consumption, and of course it'll be free. But that's okay. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this for money. Man. Yeah. So just as long as you had a good time, that's all that matters.
I had a great time. Great to talk with you.
You too, brother. Later on.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye. Tremendous day here on the Jake Feinberg Show. George Young and Dean Parks bringing us a lot of spirit in a time when we need it. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. We will see you later.